Good morning. It is 11 o'clock on June 15th, and I will call to order the June meeting of the St. Louis County Board of Police Commissioners. Chief, will you please lead us in the pledge?
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Ashworth.
Here.
Commissioner Banks.
Here.
Commissioner Hassler.
Here.
And Commissioner Schwerin.
Here. Thank you very much. Before we get started with our open discussion agenda items, I'd like to mention a few things that have occurred since our last board meeting of note. First, the board would like to recognize the resolution passed by the St. Louis County Council earlier this month, expressing gratitude and admiration for the St. Louis County Police Department Crime Scene Unit and Crime Lab for their outstanding and expeditious investigative efforts that related to the investigation of the homicide that occurred in Brentwood and the homicide that occurred in University City. The lab was able to connect and investigate and determine that those two homicides were caused by the same weapon and linked the two homicides together. And in addition, they also were able to link those crimes to crimes that occurred in South Carolina and Tennessee. And so connected a total of 5 homicides and multiple shootings and will be used in prosecution of the individuals involved. We also had the 2020 Medal of Valor award ceremony in which police officer Stanley Dooley, Detective Christopher Douglas, and police officer Adam Moisen, were honored with the Medal of Valor awards, and the board would like to extend our appreciation and our pride and our thanks to those 3 individuals for their service and for their dedication to the department and to the community. In addition, officers from the Crisis Intervention Unit and the Tactical Operations Unit were involved last Thursday with an incident of an individual in crisis. The individual was attempting suicide, and these officers and those units engaged with the individual over a course of 5 hours and negotiated with him to gain compliant surrender and to take him to a local hospital for treatment. The Police Athletic League officers had the pleasure of escorting 21 Police Athletic League students to Disney World this past month. This was made possible by a Restore grant and really was a cool event in which the officers were able to develop and deepen relationships with the PAL students and connect with the community. So thank you for that. The Welfare Association had its annual golf tournament on Monday, June 7th. It was a resounding success, and the board and the department is very grateful to the sponsors, donors, players, and all the volunteers who made it possible. Finally, I'd like to note that a lot of our incredible partnerships with the community are being able to host in-person events again. We recently enjoyed the Chess Cops program, which is led by our friends at the St. Louis Chess Club, and the Law Enforcement Torch Run, which benefits the Special Olympics. So a lot of great things happening. It's been a very busy month, and I wanted to take a moment to note all of these positive events and positive outcomes. So with that, I'll move on to our open discussion. Item number 1 on our agenda is the budget.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'm pinch hitting for Joyce Hill, the fiscal services supervisor who's took a vacation day today. So not much to report since last month. We will have the first 2 quarters report likely next month, depending on when you set the board meeting, but we should have that information. And just to give you a rough overview on our budget process right now, we have a budget kickoff meeting July 2nd. We've already been attempting to prepare the budget for the last several months, really since almost February. And thereafter, we will go through a series of meetings with county government. And by October 1, then the county executive will have his business plan that he submits to the council for approval, which is a date compared to previous years that's moved up a little bit because I think the council's interested in obtaining more time to go over the budget than in past years. That's all I have on fiscal.
Do you know offhand whether the budget that we're working on now includes anticipated CARES funding? Or not CARES Act, but the related funding?
That's separate, and the chief, I believe, has already or will be submitting something to the council on that wish list, for lack of a better term, on the CARES fund.
Okay, so we have normal operating budget, and then we have the different section.
Correct.
I can speak to that real quick. Let's be on the open process. The letter is going to go to council, and there are very strict requirements by that funding as to what it can be used for. It can't be used for salaries. It cannot be used for leases and ongoing. It can be used for structural things like a building, to buy it and purchase it. The CAD issue for for communication. So we took the things that we could submit for that act, but the other things are going to have to go into the budget, like for increased bodies and positions and things like that.
Other questions?
I guess, can we have a copy of the list of the wish list?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And one more question, and I know this is not in your wheelhouse, but you'll probably get it to the person who is working on it. Could we have the Q1 and Q2 budget numbers prior to our meeting so that we can prepare for that? Next is the crime stats update.
She should be.
Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, commissioners. This is Sarah Van Wert. Let me get my screen shared here with you. So this month for our notable events, you can see our gun crime victims are still slightly up for the year compared to last year. Additionally, our citizen complaints, internal investigations, and the other metrics from BPS are also up. Vehicle pursuits are starting to even out in the last couple of weeks. It's becoming pretty even with last year. And I think internal investigations might be up in part due to an increase in vehicle accidents, which is due to an increase in traffic on the roads again. I added a new slide this month just to kind of give an overall view of our total year-to-date NIBRS offenses. So as you can see, so far we've reported fewer property crimes, but more society crimes and crimes against persons this year compared to last year. In particular, you can see that our aggravated assaults are relatively even with last year still, and our simple assaults are slightly elevated. Intimidations are up, and the other one that's up is kidnappings, which is generally, I looked into this a little bit. I haven't had a chance to read all of the cases from last year and this year, but I started with this year's. And to be honest, most of them are domestic incidents. They don't even all involve children. quite a few of them are adults forcing another adult to stay in a place. It's still a problem, but I don't want you guys to think that these are like stranger kidnappings of children, because I didn't see any of those. Okay. This is another new slide. I wanted to make it a little clearer of which crimes were being committed with guns, because while we have an overall decrease in aggravated assaults, our aggravated assaults with firearms are still slightly increased. So I think it's really important to look at that separate. So this year so far, we've had 17 homicides with firearms reported compared to 11 last year. And as you can see, there's also an increase in aggravated assaults and a big increase in weapon law violations. Now, the weapons law violations are a little bit different. That's pretty much self-initiated activity by the officers. They're going out there and finding more guns. So that's actually a good one to see an increase in. It implies our officers are going out there and trying to get some guns away from people who aren't supposed to have guns by law.
Are these like felon in possession cases?
They can be. They can also be, you in the county, you can't just like go out in your street and like fire your gun. So it can also be that. If sometimes there's shot spotter alerts that lead us to collect shell casings, those can sometimes be considered weapon law violations as well, because we know someone was firing their gun in the county. So it overall implies that there's a lot of gun activity in the area, which can also be seen with the increase in aggravated assaults, in my opinion.
Sarah, before you change the slide, it's minuscule compared to the other numbers, but what would fall into the other violent crime?
Yeah, so those involved, a couple of those kidnappings I mentioned had a firearm used in them, and there were also a couple of rape incidents that had firearms used in them. I lumped them together because there were so few year to year, and I rarely see those even when I look at a full year of data.
Thank you.
Yeah, technically, I'm going to go back one slide really quickly. Technically, a firearm could be used in a murder, a kidnapping, forcible sex offenses, aggravated assaults, and human trafficking could potentially have one as well, I think. So, yeah. And are there any other questions on this slide? Okay. So next up, we're looking at crimes against property. The things that we've been focusing on a lot in our department are the theft of motor vehicle parts and accessories, this row kind of in the middle. We haven't approved all of our reports for these yet. And, we've seen decreases in some areas, but this is that category in which the catalytic converter thefts fall. So we are seeing quite a few of those right now. We're currently trying to look into more information to try to give command staff better information on where those are occurring and like time of day and all of that information. And then the other thing that we focus a lot on are those motor vehicle thefts. So overall for the county, motor vehicle thefts are down this year compared to previous years. But week to week, when we look at the data, we're actually still seeing really high numbers and some increases in areas such as South County and Afton. So we're very concerned about that still as well, and really trying to look into that further.
Sorry, it's Brian here short. It looks like what I would traditionally call white collar crime is on the rise too, which means.
Yeah, some of that is because we weren't out and about last year. Some of those fraud offenses, for instance, are like fraud impersonations, which occur when an officer asks someone for their information and then the person like gives them a false name. That's a fraud impersonation technically. I notice that there's a big increase in some of these other categories as well, such as embezzlement and bribery. And I'm interested in looking more into that. I just have not had the opportunity at this time to do so. But you're right, though, there are some increases there as well that are somewhat concerning. So next up is those crimes against society. And again, we kind of covered the weapon law violations already. Those have increased a good amount. And then the other big increase has been in drug and narcotic violations. Once again, that's due to the fact that our officers are out there doing more self-initiated enforcement, particularly in like North County and Jennings areas. So this is kind of returning to more closely to what I've seen in previous years.
Sarah, if you go on, thanks for calling out the things that are turning in the wrong direction, but the pornography and obscene material it's a nice trend in that direction though.
Yeah, I don't have any reason why that is also so much lower. I haven't looked into it. When things are going the right direction, I usually don't have a chance to look into them. But you're right, it is looking a lot better this year. Part of that could be because it takes some time to sometimes get those cases approved and reported to the state. And the data that I'm able to give you guys at these meetings is the state data. So that number could go up a little bit in coming months for May. For instance, as you can see, we had 0 incidents reported in May right now. But if we approve some incidents that occurred in May in June, I'll be adding those to May, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So the other thing that was requested from the board last month was a longer comparison of crime data. Now, for the newer members of the board, we changed our method of reporting crime data in 2020. So I'm unable to give you these same breakdowns of crime data for more than 2 years. Eventually, I will be able to do that. Just it's going to take a few more years to get there. So what I did was I took our crime data from 2020 and 2021 and wrapped it into the same rules that we used to go by to submit our crime data to the state. So what that means is there's a hierarchy. So if there was an aggravated assault and also a larceny in a case, only that aggravated assault is going to get counted. The larceny is considered a lesser offense and it just doesn't get counted. So how we count crime data now is significantly better, but this is what the FBI used to collect. So with that in mind, when you turn it into the old style, we're pretty even for the last 5 years or so. In 2020, we saw, at this point year to date, we saw a reduction in our crimes against property, but we were seeing the very same number as the year before in crimes against persons. And so far this year, we've seen a further drop in crimes against property compared to the other years, but and a slight decrease in crimes against persons. So this is kind of the data that we used to collect for the government. So these are the categories that I included for you today to see kind of a 6-year trend. As you can see, our homicides have gone up pretty much year to year. In 2016, at this time, we'd only had 5. And when I ran the numbers, we were up to 19 this year for all criminal homicides. For rapes, on the other hand, we're seeing kind of a reduction year to year, which that's good. For robbery firearms, we've also seen a reduction. Other robberies, additionally, has been pretty consistent the last few years. As you can see, aggravated assaults have increased while other assaults have decreased. But I think the most interesting ones to me are actually burglaries, which have drastically decreased in the last 6 years, and larcenies, which have also drastically decreased.
Sarah, as you're looking through this data,
Yes.
is there a reason? Do we have a program in place that has attributed to this,
Or the technology?
I think some of it is technology. I think some of it is trends. We just had a lot more burglaries previously, and then starting last year, everyone was in their house all the time. And so we started seeing a reduction in burglaries last year that just hasn't gone back up, which is great. As for the larcenies, this year, it's really hard for me to tell because in 2016 through 2019, we didn't really have a good breakdown of larcenies the way that we do now, where you can look at, is it a theft from a motor vehicle? Is it a shoplifting? So it's hard for me to say specific trends that have caused a decrease there. But I know this year compared to last year, our shopliftings are way, way down. And so I'm wondering if it might be related to shopliftings in a good amount of shopliftings, because it's certainly not related to car break-ins or thefts of motor vehicle parts and accessories, because those we're not seeing the same decrease in. Changing direction, next up we've got calls for service. So I realized last month I hadn't really fully explained for the newer members of the board what a directed call for service is. All that means is this is a call for service that a citizen or a business or, you know, someone called us for help. And these are the radio calls of people going to those calls. So we see an increase in May across pretty much all the precincts, and that's pretty much to be expected. We start to see more calls for service in the summer months every year. So usually that starts around May, the weather's hotter, kids are out of school. It's just what we tend to see. So this is following the trend that I would anticipate, just seeing a few more calls for service in all the precincts. For self-initiated calls, when we see increases in precinct getting directed calls, we tend to see officers have less time to do self-initiated activity. So when there's an increase in calls for service, typically we then see an associated decrease in self-initiated calls for service across, like during the summer months, just because of time. And the final thing I'll talk about today is the traffic stops. So our numbers look pretty good for the year. We're still, so we've made around 14,300 stops this year, which is up from where we were last year. Last year we were at 12,900. So 14,300, definitely an increase compared to last year. But this is still really far down compared to where we were pre-pandemic. Before the pandemic, in 2019 at this point, we had made 22,800 stops. So it's definitely still down. We're just stopping fewer cars for the safety of officers and citizens. As so far, most of our precincts are doing pretty well with their percent white and percent minority stops compared to what their precinct makeup is. Central County is a little bit higher than their makeup, but that's in part due to where traffic stops have been occurring. They've been occurring more in the higher minority population areas. And then Afton is also slightly up, and I did not have a chance to look into why they have that increase. But most everyone else is pretty close to the makeup of the department. For example, highway safety, they make more stops than anyone else. They were at 32% minority compared to our overall county population of 30.5%. Does anyone else have any questions about any of this information?
Can you explain the special response unit though?
Oh, they only made 4 stops, and they've mostly been working in the North County and City of Jennings areas. So their 4 stops were all minority members, but it's only 4 stops, so it's hard to really know if there is like a problem there when they were specifically in higher minority population areas for special enforcement. Thank you for asking, though. I meant to point that out.
Sarah, do you mind flipping back to the notable events slide?
No, of course. Oh.
I just noticed that there was a significant uptick, well, maybe not significant in citizen complaints, but internal investigation incidents and use of force incidents looks like it's up.
Yes.
And I wondered if you had looked into that and had
an
explanation or whatever triggered the increase.
Yeah, so I haven't looked into those specifically, particularly with the use of force. I am pretty sure the internal investigations. So, okay, if you notice, the department vehicles are also up. They are up by 19, and our internal investigations are up by 16. Every time we have a traffic stop, or I'm sorry, every time we have a vehicle accident, that also triggers an internal investigation. So I think that the number of internal investigations being higher is partly due to an increase in vehicle accidents this year. I would have to look into that into more detail to know for sure if that's what's causing the increase. And I can certainly do that before the next meeting if you would like.
Thank you.
And then for uses of force, I also haven't looked into that more specifically, but there's 14 more so far this year compared to last year. And I'm going to anticipate that that number is going to get higher and higher this year compared to last year because uses of force happen when you're interacting more with the public. And we just, our interactions with the public really dropped off last year. So I'm guessing we're going to see a higher percent difference between last year and this year as the year progresses. And I'm definitely keeping my eye on those. I have not looked at these specifically yet, but it's on my list of things to do in the very near future.
I apologize in advance for putting you on the spot, but
It's okay.
do you know offhand if we compare it to 2019 when we had more interaction with the community pre-COVID, if our numbers were similar?
I would have to look. I remember that last year when I was looking at this data, it was steadily down compared to 2019. But as for the specific numbers, I would absolutely want to check on that and not say something incorrect.
The follow-up would be, will you please do that and let us know?
Yes, absolutely. If it would make it easier, I can just add the BPS areas of the notable events. I can add 2019 on there so you can see a little bit further trend. I won't be able to do the gun crime victims, but the rest of it I can add 2019 so that you can see a better trend since COVID was really affected our numbers in 2020.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's no problem at all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right, thank you.
So next on our agenda is.
Can I interrupt a second? Lieutenant Longworth from Crimes Against Persons would like to give you an update on it.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm going to give you some real-time numbers. Hopefully it won't exactly match Sarah's numbers. There's reasons for that because those numbers are taking off data that is after the reports are approved, that sort of thing. So this is pretty much real time right now, sorry, as of today. So we have done 36 investigations so far. 29 of those homicide investigations, I'm sorry. 29 of those were in the St. Louis County Patrol area or the areas that actually all the areas we patrol. 7 were municipal homicides. Of that number, 28 of the ones in the county or areas we patrolled were regular murders. 1 was justified, and out of the 7 in the other areas, those were all when I say regular murders, they were typical homicides were not justified. Okay? So of that number, we are currently at 36, 26 at this same time last year, so we're up by quite a few. That's total homicides again. We're talking about these. Most of our murders, of course, 83% are committed by gun crime. There's another 13% that are committed by other, which can be anything from hands, feet, fists to things like that. Knives typically are smaller. They're probably about 2.8%. Let's see. Clearance rate is we're very happy with is at 97%. Now I want to make sure that we all understand the clearance rate. I know some of the members of the board have been here before and have heard this, but we include previous periods, okay, for these clearance rates. Right, so in other words, so far this year, out of the 36 we've handled, we've cleared 26. We have to add to that what we have cleared from previous years in this year, which are 9 additional ones. Right? So, and the reason we do it that way is that's how the FBI counts them, because otherwise you would never be able to take clearance from it unless you knew that you cleared it somewhere, right? I can't go back to 19's numbers for the FBI and say, here, by the way, we cleared 2 more in 21. So that's kind of just give you an update on that sort of thing. Our average age for the homicides that we've handled in St. Louis County areas are 25.58 for just 25 and a half years old. The average age range in our homicides in the other areas are about 23 to, it ranges from 23 to 51, but we're about 36 years of age is the average.
When you say average age, is that of the victim?
Of the victims, I'm sorry.
Could you state those again? So what was the difference between the first set of numbers and the second set of numbers?
Okay, the first set of numbers, the average age, yes, sir. The first set that I gave you, that said that the 29 that we've handled for our St. Louis County areas that we patrol and contract with, and that is 25.5 age, 25 and a half. The other ones for municipals, the average age is 36.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course, there's no way for me to figure out why that is. To give you one other idea as to why these things are happening, I can tell you this, that 30% of these cases are personal feud, okay, which obviously we all understand what that is. And then, unfortunately for us, there is another 19.4%, which brings us almost to half total there, are domestic related. Okay? And then, of course, there's about 30% that are unknown because we're still working on them. We're not sure exactly what it is. So that's kind of just to give you an overview of in real time where we're at on these cases and what we're doing with them. So, and other than that, the motives drug related, not as many as everybody thinks. However, drugs typically touch somewhere in this. It can depend on the victim or the suspect using one thing or another, but that's not the actual reason for the murder. Any
And when
questions?
you say drugs, do you mean illegal drugs?
Illegal, illicit, yes. Any questions? Could I help with anything else I can answer for you if I can?
Those percentages that you were quoting, those are consistent, generally consistent year over year. How many are done with guns versus knives or other?
Absolutely. I would say if anything, the guns are almost typically between 80 and 90% every year. It's just one like that, man. So what used to be a fist fight, that you guys have heard me say this for the previous board members, what used to be a fist fight, now I shoot you after that. Fortunately, I have no way to stop that. So.
And the Ys are also generally consistent, the feud or the domestic.
Absolutely. Yeah, they range all kinds of reasons for the personal feuds, everything from lawn clippings on my grass to on my driveway to stole something I had along the car battery or whatever. It's not something.
So as I'm always saying that even though there may be more of those because society's bigger, right? We just have more people. The
More people.
reasons why haven't substantially changed over time.
No, it really hasn't. It's quite the same. The other thing that we're very blessed by here in St. Louis County is the citizen participation. We have people are always willing to talk to at least my folks for sure. We get a lot of cooperation from the citizens, which is very helpful to us. People still talk to us, which is good.
Is there anything about the stats you shared with us that you find concerning or especially enlightening?
Other than the fact that we're obviously going up and up every year, this has been an ongoing issue for the last 5 years. The update started. We should have not stopped that, but I don't know. So that's the only concern I have is the update. For a while, we were seeing where we had more females that were being killed. We're still seeing some, but not as many as we used to have. A couple of these homicides, just to let you know, involve babies, pretty much infants that toddlers that get their hands on fentanyl that somebody in the home is using. So there's at least 2 of them this year that I'm aware of for that. That's a felony crime that the family's involved or whoever the person's left the drugs there, so they're committed. This child gets sent in justice.
So typically you think of what could reduce these kinds of crimes as well as all kinds of crimes. And one thought is having such an impressive clearance rate would think would serve as a deterrent.
One would hope.
But it doesn't seem like that's happening here.
Well, I think we get the message out pretty good. But the unfortunate thing when you're dealing with domestic homicides, things like that, people are just they've lost it at that point. They're doing what they're going to do, regardless of what our clearance rate is. Sometimes they don't care. They really don't care about the police involvement. There's nothing to do to stop it. And the other problem is patrol division can't stop it because it's inside a house. Nobody sees what happened, right? So that's concerning, but there's not a lot we can do with that. And I will tell you this, domestic wise, we have a lot of programs. I think you guys have all been upstairs and we have advocates who try to help us. We government, I say the government, state government recently released additional funds for us now, where we have the ability to give people safe places to stay. We already did have that, but it was limited. Now we have even more. Work very hard with them to try to make sure that we can help these people. Each officer, when he goes to a domestic violence call, fills out a survey and has the person answer certain questions. It's called a lethality assessment. I don't know if I've ever discussed that. really works pretty good. It's a series of about 15 questions. It gives us identifiers of people that are at high risk, probably with more harm or worse than that. So as a result, once we identify those folks, we offer them immediately a place to go. We pay for everything. I say we, I'm talking about different communities that assist us. They pay for a place for them and their children to be until we keep them safe and get the person in custody. Because sometimes afterwards, we're able to move them somewhere else, try to avoid these type of issues. And that's worked fairly well in some cases I'm aware of. Other ones, people refuse to do what they want to stay there.
Most of your manpower allocated to the North and Central District, is that where the majority of these?
Majority of our homicides occur in the county precinct or the northern areas.
That's where most of your guys are deployed.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Well, thanks for your service.
Thanks for the update.
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is an update on human resources.
So some more numbers for you. With respect to the commissioned officers, we have 979 authorized. We have 930 actual, which leaves 49 current vacancies. With respect to professional staff, we have 370 authorized. We have 332 actual professional staff employees, which leaves 38 vacancies. The class 202 at the academy is going to be graduating June 24th. There's going to be 10 county graduates. There are 4 females in that class, and there are also 3 African Americans in that class, which goes toward our diversity goals from the past. And class 203 is scheduled to start June 25th. That class is still being filled, but it has similar demographics. The retirement and resignations over the past 3 years, we average on resignations and retirements together, we average about 3.74 per month. And with, that's for police officers. With professional staff, it's a little lower, it's about 3 per month. So right now in 2021, and this is typical for the first half of the year where retirements and resignations are up, we're averaging about 6 per month. I expect and hope that will tail off by December, by the end of 2021. The professional staff retirements and resignations are actually a little bit below the average, and it's at about 3.5 per month. And I have the various totals on those also, but we're looking at from 2019, 24 retirements, 57 resignations for 81 termination of employment, if you will. And then in 2020, it is 24 retirements, this is aggregate, 77 resignations for 101. So that number was up just slightly from the previous year. And then this year we're on track for about the same total of 100 terminations of employment, whatever that may be, retirements or resignations.
Carl, those numbers would say that by the end of the year, assuming trends remain with roughly 10 grads for a couple more academies. But if you're losing, say, between 4 and 7, that says by end of the year, we're going to have about 70 vacancies.
Yeah, and so a couple things on that. One thing, they do tend to tail off toward the end of the year historically, so that helps a little bit. The other is we do have some lateral applicants where we don't have to put them through the academy. And then.
What do you mean when you say lateral?
Experienced officers. Experienced officers. We have some now in the application process also. So that helps because then we don't have to train them. And then, but you're right. I mean, we did actually have a goal of 35 for the June 28th class, and we only have 10. And that's just a national trend of difficulty in recruiting. And we're going to be facing the same situation where we're going to want to have 35 at least in the January class. And we're going to try and fulfill that goal. And I think it's possible with the help of different recruiting techniques, perhaps adding an additional recruiter, and then also traditionally the open enrollment occurs in January, where the Maryville and Lindenwood, and hopefully Paris Stowe will have open enrollment students there fulfilling their last semester of their bachelor's degree and also getting their academy post-certification. And that oftentimes can result in hiring for us and other departments also, but obviously for St. Louis County too.
So are there any new recruitment strategies that you're considering or planning? I know, you talked about the traditional, but they're not yielding a lot of results. So, for example, if you wanted 25, but you got 10, but you want to increase it to 35, but you still only got 10. So how can that be ameliorated?
So the short answer is I'm not certain, frankly. There are a lot of things that we try. I don't think there's any one answer. I don't have a knock it out of the park answer for you. I think there's a lot of things that we try. Now that COVID is kind of going away and we're going to get out there to the communities, I think that's going to help. We've heavily targeted minority and ethnic publications as much as possible, as much as we can afford in order, in other words, the Bosnian community, some African-American publications we're targeting, advertising, we're getting out to the different ethnic festivals and so forth. We're getting out to the colleges, we're opening up relationships with them. As I say, we already have a great relationship with Maryville and Lindenwood, and that can be a good source of applicants and for the community also. But and then last year we had Women's Day in September, which yielded 2 applications, which I'm pleased with. Because of COVID, the crowd was limited, the attendees were limited to 15. I think we can really expand that. I think it was a great hit. It was a great target day where we just spent the whole day at the academy, went through a variety of courses and instruction and so forth, exposed them to all the different units in the department. We had the helicopter there, the Bearcat from the SWAT team. They were able to discharge tasers. They were actually able to simulate a traffic stop, see what it's like actually being a police officer and walking up to a car and experiencing that, and very positive feedback that we had from that. I think we can expand on that, and we can apply that to other groups also.
You mentioned that the problem with recruitment is not unique to our department, and I guess, were you talking about across the country, or are you talking about regionally? And then follow up on that, do you know what other departments are doing, not necessarily Missouri, but other places?
So to answer your first question, yes, it's nationwide. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we all read the newspaper, we all look at television. It's tough to get somebody to apply. I can tell you it's very common in our background investigations when we talk to loved ones, whether it's parents or a spouse or significant other, they all say they're very proud of the applicant, but they have great reservations. I don't think I've ever seen a background investigation in the last year where the loved ones haven't expressed that concern for the applicant. And then with respect to ideas, it was actually one of our background investigators, Tyler Cruz, who was interviewing somebody with respect to the Women's Day idea. It was the Tulsa Police Department that did it. He brought it to his supervisors, and the rest is history. I mean, it's always a team effort. It's an indication that there's not one knock it out of the park kind of idea, that we're going to have to do a lot of things. I don't know of anything particularly more innovative than something like that, either the Women's Day or some kind of a day for other groups to target them. We hit the colleges heavily. UMSL isn't part of the open enrollment plan, but we have a great relationship with them where we get referrals from their criminology department. We're able to send our officers there just to lecture to some of the various classes, just to get exposure for the department and draw attention to us.
Maybe we can go when we meet, but how do you go further into the pipeline? Are we doing that at high schools? So we get little kids coming out of high school that would say, I'm going into college so I can come out 4 years from now. And
Yeah, that's a whole nother area. That's mostly Bureau of Community Engagement, which is under HR. But we have a lot of different programs. We have the CAPLE program, Career and Pathways Through Law Enforcement, that you're familiar with. We have the PAL program, which hits even the younger kids. And, you know, they just went to Disney World. And I think there's a great relationship with those kids and our officers. So I think that helps. Whether they become police officers or involved in law enforcement, I think they're going to be better citizens because of the involvement with the police department. We also have an Explore program that it's very difficult to do, but we want to expand it as much as possible. The 7th precinct is just an outstanding Explorer post. They just have many explorers. They put on their own trivia night and raise a bunch of money for themselves. And we do get hires from them, applicants from them. We want to build up the post. The 3rd and 4th precinct, they have their own post. North County doesn't have a post at all. And what that takes is a commitment from several officers to be able to make that happen, because every post needs a post supervisor, and it has to be a commissioned officer to make it succeed.
maybe that I don't know this, do we have any form of a police RO, the equivalent of an ROTC for high school, where people are learning to be military? Are there an ROTC program in high school where people learn to be officers?
Somewhat. We also have the cadet program, of course, for 18 to 21-year-olds. There is a law enforcement program at North County Tech, and we do have an SRO there, school resource officer. So that's actually a reasonable pipeline too. It's about as close to ROTC as I can think of.
Is the requirement 2 years of college or 4?
To apply as a police officer? Well, it's 64 credit hours, or it's military service, 2 years military service, or it's a year of county service, which we count the 1-year cadet service as a year, or another stepping stone, if you will, if they don't have the military and the college, is to work in security services as an armed security guard.
So the community college is a potential spot
For recruiting?
for recruitment?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because I didn't hear you mention them, I know the community colleges. They come out with 2 years, or they come out with social security.
Right,
They can
64
apply.
hours, sure.
So they are part of the plan of the schools
Yes.
you work with.
And we tried to get to Lincoln University before they created their own academy in order to do open enrollment there, but they beat us to the punch. They now have their own academy, and Captain Kelly and I will be visiting them soon just to lend them a hand. I mean, it's all generally the same post requirements, the same curriculum. We'll lend them a hand, whatever they need in getting their academy going and answering any of their questions. And obviously the potential.
I think it's safe to say, we'll talk a little bit more. I think it's safe to say we're much more of a detailed understanding of what we're doing. 70 officers, maybe you can talk about the professional side of this. Can you give us a quick snapshot into, I'm rounding 40 openings, I know you said 38 on 370, so that's, we've got about 11% opening rate there too, so.
Yeah, for professional staff. Yeah, I think just generally speaking that the as far as getting by and getting the work done, I think the staffing's okay. I don't see a dire problem with professional staff. The biggest area, the two biggest areas will be our security services and communications.
Communications is dispatchers?
Yes, yes. And that's a challenge. In part, it was COVID. Now it's a matter of, right now we can only have 3 academy classes per year, because once and we could do up to 12, we only have 6 going into this next academy class in July. The problem is, once they graduate from their 5-week academy program, they go out into the field, there aren't enough trainers on the floor to have more classes. So we're limited right now to 3 per year. We're trying to figure out a way how we're going to get, beyond that. Even an experienced dispatcher will go through our 5-week program, because we've determined this will be the 10th class in July, that assimilate better, whether they're experienced or not, by going through our own program, because we're somewhat idiosyncratic.
So you said there's a shortage of trainers. Why is that and how can that be increased?
So I'm not sure the reason why. It's just a limit as to how many people are qualified on the floor to train, because it is a very young staff, is probably the short answer.
So there's nothing to really do about that.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'm challenging Captain Morrow and Deputy Director Claiborne to come up with something. We'll figure something out.
Because now the other part of that, I guess, in communications is that what's the turnover rate there?
Well, because of the staffing issues, they're on 12s. There's a little bit
12
higher
hours.
turnover. 12-hour shifts, mandatory 12-hour shifts. I don't know what the precise number is off the top of my head, but it's been relatively steady the past several years.
Steady in terms of people staying,
And resignations, yeah,
both of them.
yes.
So we talked a little bit about filling the expected vacancies. Have we looked into not necessarily the retirements, but the resignations? Do we have exit interviews?
We do.
Okay. Are we seeing trends of why people are resigning and or where they're going?
I see two trends, one out of law enforcement completely, which I'm not really sure how to rectify that. If anybody has that answer, I'd love to listen, and that's understandable. The other is to other departments that perhaps, and outside of the county, even outside of the city, that don't have the overtones or the threat of being defunded and thus losing pay or losing their job. More solidly based departments in terms of the scuttlebutt of defunding.
So, okay, I'm not clear because I asked the same question she did. That was about where they're going. So maybe I've just missed it. I haven't heard of any scuttlebutt about the county in terms of defunding specifically. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, it's exactly that, right? It's the scuttlebutt. They see what's happening in the city, and I'm just generalizing from the information that I have, talking to people, looking at the exit interviews. They see a trend in the city where there's a reduction in the number of officers, authorized officers. They see that as an initial step toward defunding. They see that it could be moving into the county. That's their perception. Again, it's scuttlebutt. They saw last year with the budget process where we were being tasked with cutting and providing budgets of cuts of 10 and 5%, and then a zero budget. They see those things and add them up. Whether perception is reality, that's why it's scuttlebutt. I'm just suggesting this is why some people are leaving. Those are the two biggest reasons: get out of law enforcement and the perception that we're not financially moving in the right direction as a county for law enforcement.
So is it accurate to say that we're losing good officers because of a fear that we aren't going to be able to pay?
That's fair to say.
So that would be with professional, the officers as well as the professional staff, a similar kind of perception. When you're talking about, what was it, 49 vacancies with officers, 38 with professional staff?
That's commissioned, I would say, those 2 points that I made. For professional staff, it's generally higher pay and getting out of law enforcement as a result.
But for the officers, for the commissioned officers, the 49 vacancies, for example, is that the same kind of thinking or fear or?
Yes, it's either getting out of law enforcement or that perception. Those are the two main reasons why they're leaving the department or law enforcement altogether.
That they can't grow in the department or adjust their salaries. because those are two different things. Are they looking at the fact that there's no room for them to grow, for them to be promoted?
No, ma'am, I'm not suggesting that. One big thing is just getting out of law enforcement altogether. The second thing is the perception that the department financially, that St. Louis County financially is not going in the right direction. And therefore, they're going to go to another department that they perceive as more stable. Now, whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but that's the perception. And those are the two biggest reasons for commission. The biggest reason on professional staff is they leave law enforcement and get more money. It's the number one reason on professional staff.
I guess I was concerned about them having very similar perceptions across the board.
Well, again, and all employees talk, we know that. And I would imagine professional staff have those perceptions also. A big part with the security services and communications, they would shift work. So that's obviously a deterrent for some people that just want to get out of law enforcement. They may get just a slight increase in pay, but they also don't have to work on Sunday or Christmas. So that's intriguing to some people to get out of law enforcement. Those are the biggest reasons with professional staff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is a body camera video release policy update. It's a mouthful.
Good afternoon, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. Please report that we've had more progress on this front in the past 2 weeks than we have probably in the past 2 years. As discussions have continued with Lieutenant Hampton, his crew, mainly in the form of Miss Marissa Williams, Lieutenant Longworth, and Captain Wayne Cox, as well as our office, we've probably identified the most appropriate way to address this is a revision to a current general order that is 18-115 officer involved curriculums that's handled by the Bureau of Crimes Against Persons. A draft is being improved upon, and a copy of that's already been disseminated to our internal stakeholders. That happened about 12 days ago for any type of input or concerns. One thing kind of threw us a little bit of a curveball is new guidance from the federal government. The Department of Justice is pivoting on the way that they've looked at these, and the way that their officers and our task force officers are going to be affected by them. While it's kind of delaying things on our end because we want to align with what they are doing, it's good that it's happening while we're having this discussion anyway, instead of later on if we would have gotten some pen to paper officially and then had to pivot in the future. When I talk about task force officers, this is mainly investigators in the Bureau of, or the Division of Criminal Investigation, Bureau of Drug Enforcement. These are guys that are detached to the DEA or the FBI. These are guys that work undercover operations that are also working with confidential informants, furthering these investigations. Same thing for our intelligence unit. So a lot of these conversations with assignments such as those are potentially very complex. It's not as easy as having a precinct officer who's uniformed driving a marked car who is responding to radio calls or initiating their own activity. Let's see. What are the next steps? We have today a dry run exercise. It's a role play intended to occur at the academy. We are going to see start to finish what it looks like. So 2 uniformed officers are going to show up wearing body cams. They're going to show up in marked cars with dash cams. We're going to have an officer involved critical incident where an unarmed suspect is fatally wounded. And we're going to take from that point in time through the exercise to see exactly what it takes as far as manpower, any type of hiccups, any type of challenges we didn't foresee in the creation of this video. I think the best way to do that in a controlled environment, a dry run, as opposed to the real thing when we have actual citizens and members of our department who are intimately impacted by whatever event that is. After some more revisions, we hope to solicit some input from the prosecuting attorney's office and the U.S. Attorney's Office. We will need their buy-in to proceed with this. And hopefully, in an ideal world, we have that video created on today's role play to show them, so that way they know exactly what we're talking about. We have submitted for the 2022 budget. I know I told you guys that last meeting, we submitted one additional body for the Public Information Office. If you take a more holistic approach to this and look at the other units that this project touches, I think that it most appropriately be addressed by 4 additional bodies. That would be one to the Public Information Office, one to the Bureau of Crimes Against Persons in the form of an analyst, and 2 more to the Camera Systems Unit. All of these units are going to be lifting this load together, so would probably be best to address it on the front end, make sure everybody has the necessary resources, because if we say we're going to have a product done at a specific point of time, we've got to be able to meet that deadline, especially if we're the ones setting those parameters. Do you have any questions?
This all sounds very logical and very smart to go through the activity and adjust our policy if we see any hiccups, or adjust our practices, to comply with this policy. What's our timeline look like now?
I don't know if I have a great answer for that, and while I don't want to pass the buck, I want to be very forthright. We have got to talk to our federal partners. A lot of that is going to be the assistance of Captain Weincox, because he's got that network overseeing the drug unit. We've got to have those difficult discussions with them. I think that we'll probably get pretty quick buy-in from Mr. Bell's office, just based on past experience. But that's a good question. And with this dry run exercise, between the 3 units most impacted by this, we are going to be tallying how much time and manpower this actually takes to do. So that way we could estimate that 4 bodies will help us get this across the finish line regularly each time. If we put this into practice and we find that, hey, this is more or less, we could adjust accordingly. However, no one officer involved critical incident is the same as another one. And so much of this is going to be determined on the facts and circumstances of those individual incidents. This policy will have an out if we have something remarkable, something catastrophic, where we've got a Sandy Hook or something else like that. We might not be able to proceed in the same fashion with something of that nature with an incident that involves only 1 officer and 1 suspect.
I'm going to ask Michelle's question a little differently. Maybe it's just the way I think about it. Is it going to be done by year end?
I would certainly hope so. The federal government tasked their agencies with a 30-day turnaround. We've got, I think, a good understanding of what theirs might look like. I would think year end is definitely practical. I would hope within a couple months we bring this thing across the finish line where everybody is comfortable with it. This is a conversation that's not going away. And it's one that we also have to look at we have to strike a balance between the public's right to know and then the right to a fair trial and the privacy of those individuals that are most affected by these situations.
All of the colleagues in here, this may be either inappropriate to ask it at this time or in this venue, but can you give us a high level of what the policy looks like? Is it always on policy? Is it turned on for specific situations? Just give us a high level overview of it. No, it's in here. High level understanding of it.
Enforcement actions, yes. When we get into these task force officers, those are lines we're going to have to understand, and those officers and those supervisors will have to understand also. That is kind of a separate policy where we're talking about body and dash cams as opposed to the release of that information, or where this would fit in specifically with officer involved critical incidents investigated by the Bureau of Crimes Against Persons.
Thank you for connecting those dots. So those policies would all loosely roll out at the same. The policy around body cams, the policy on releasing body cam information, those would all play out about the same time.
So 2 of those are already out. The most logical place for this is in revision 2 of those general orders. The body and dash cam is already out, and when we're making a revision or an enhancement such as this, we got to make sure that we are aligning with the other applicable policies, procedures, or in the state of Missouri, Sunshine Law especially.
So I know I've said this before, and I want to make sure we do this right. And I want to make sure that we do this in a way that every expectation we're able to meet. We don't set ourselves up for failure. But I mean, something that keeps me up at night is what if we have a critical incident tomorrow? And how are we going to react? And I think having a policy in place that defines how we are going to deal with this data is going to make the department's handling of this easier and the community's expectations better. So I think we should do it right. But I also think we need to make this a priority. I know you all are, and I really appreciate, I know there's been so much time that's gone into this. So I'm just gonna share my thoughts gratuitously and thank you for all the work that you've done and hope that the team can keep up the pace it's at right now to get this in place.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we can. The chief has demonstrated the same sense of urgency with this topic. I think that we're all doing the best that we can. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that while the release of body and dash cams, it's only one piece of the puzzle. We'll still approach officer about critical incidents in the same manner we do now, where you're seeing Chief Barton, myself, or another member of the department, most likely Tracy, providing a briefing curbside, where we are providing the best facts and circumstances of an incident that we can. After working with the Bureau of Crimes Against Persons, all that preliminary information, those things won't change. Neither will the email disseminations or the updates provided on our social media platforms either. This is just one more piece of the puzzle that we can do to provide the public the level of transparency I think that they expect in 2021.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is an update on the 97-point strategy that was initially presented to the board earlier this year.
Hello again. So the Teneo retreat that I referenced last month, where stakeholders and Teneo are going to come in town end of this month, has been postponed by Teneo. So that will occur because of scheduling issues either in August or September, we're hoping. In the meantime, what they've suggested is to have, get ahead of the game on for the retreat and be prepared, is to have some periodic breakout sessions with various groups. So I know other commanders and the chiefs have been meeting on a regular basis with various Teneo members. I know I've had 4 meetings just on HR with Chief Hill from Teneo, and working collaboratively as possible with them. And Commissioner Ashworth, to get to your point about the more specifics on a recruiting plan, we've actually been working with Chief Hill on a 3-year recruitment plan. She's given us some good ideas, other ways to look at things, so we should have something next month for you. And the goal then is, depending on when your next meeting is in July, for us to have a brief written summary of kind of the status, and then research and analysis is also going to put together some statistics and graphics just to give you an idea of where we're at. I would generalize and say 1/3 of the things we've accomplished, 1/3 we're working on, and 1/3 are either long-term and we're not going to do it. And when I say we're not going to do it, over the past month in our meetings, more and more often, Teneo is emphasizing these are 97 recommendations, they're not mandates. So they recognize that some of them are cost prohibitive, like body cameras for everyone commissioned on up to the chief of police. And they recognize that there are limitations. So they're emphasizing that they're recommendations. So that's part of our dialogue with them, is to talk about, you know, what is really the best practice and how we can fit it into the St. Louis County Police Department. And so again, hopefully we'll have, depending on your meeting date in July, we'll have further information for you then in writing as to the Teneo status.
So the document that was presented, the 97 points, it was color coded with immediate and intermediate and long term. The intermediate said, or I'm sorry, the short term said 30 to 90 days, and it's been 90 days. When you say a third of them are done, it's not a third that were immediate, because there are items on the list that said we are going to immediately address these that haven't been addressed.
I would, of the 97, I would say a third of them are, we've done them. Now, where that fits in on the color coded, because I think there were maybe even 4 categories. Already accomplished, immediate, the 30 to 90 days, intermittent, and then the long term. So I would say about a third of those, but we'll have more specific numbers and quantify it better next month.
Are you prepared to talk about some of the items that are listed as immediate?
Today? Sure.
Okay. I mean, we got this document and it was very organized and set forth with a timeline, but we haven't really gotten an update on where things stand. And there were some that seemed, at least to me and everybody else, please jump in and jump down my throat if you disagree with me, but some that seemed fairly simple, like in a clear, I don't remember the exact term, but something like a clear anti-discrimination or anti-harassment policy, which to me seems like an easy policy to put in place. I can't imagine a single individual or group that is a stakeholder within the department that would object to that. So we haven't seen it to approve. So where is that?
So that's close. As you know, we have a stakeholder process. And right now, Lieutenant Hampton and I will be meeting with the deputy chief just to iron some things out. As you know, his mother passed, so we'll be able to finalize that. We have a couple sections that we need to talk to him about and anticipate that hopefully it'll be ready for you in July.
So I think it would be helpful, and maybe this is where the document you're creating for us for July will come in handy, is to know where we are with each of those items. Just because we haven't seen progress, and maybe it's shame on us for not asking every month. But I'd like to know what we're doing, and these are supposed to be accomplished within the first quarter, where we are.
And we will have that information for you, depending on what your date of your next July meeting, but if it's 4 weeks from now, we should have it for you. And the more specifics that I think you're getting at. And then in regard to representing that or estimating, I will say that we're going to have items immediately or short-term done. There's always surprises, bumps in the road kind of a thing. And obviously we do have other responsibilities. So perhaps some of them were a little overly optimistic, or we didn't anticipate a certain issue that we want to work out. And, just like the body cam policy, really think it out, get it solid, get you a good product to vote on.
Any other questions on that?
You got the gist of it.
Okay, so I think we'll roll this topic to next month as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a second?
Yes?
2 things. Number one, I can't bring you up to date. As regards the CAD project, which is the number 1 project or recommendation, I wanted that from multiple fronts. That's my number 1 ask on the affordable, I can't remember the acronym for the 100 and whatever million that's going to go into the council. And the second big ask on there was the new property control facility. So it's also on the ask. And I also am looking at other avenues, should that not be funded by that. I've spoken to Dr. Page on several occasions and asked for, if we can't get it, a supplemental appropriation, because these, as you will remember, the 2 biggest things I mentioned besides the retreat. So those are in progress on multiple fronts. So I have been working on those, just to bring you up to date on those. But those 2 things really made forward progress on. But as you remember, we made the property control a long-term project because we had to come up with several $1 million. So those have moved forward and will move forward, and that you'll see that when you get a copy of it. Also, I would hate to be remiss, but for the new board member, I would like to introduce our historian, our department historian and former chief of police here, Gil Kleineck. He's at the meeting today, and Mr. Ashworth, this is our department historian. It is a volunteer position here, and he donates his time to collect all the artifacts. And I've been told I'm one of them from this police department. And there's all that stuff you see in the cases in the hallway and all that stuff that's in the vault. He collects those, labels them, and displays them so that we never forget our past or where we came from here. So I just wanted to make the introduction.
You're quite the legend. I love your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
We'll all be a part of history.
Chief? I'm sorry to ask this question. I'm sure I'm going to be really naive here. What is the new property control initiative?
We have a property control, evidence control facility on the second floor, I'm sorry, of this building. Yeah, I'll remember. It has overgrown its space, and evidence is literally stacked to the ceilings in there. So we have not yet been cited, but I'm sure that it's down the road. We need to expand. Recent changes in opinions by the county counselor's office indicating holding of evidence longer. It may increase our need up to 65,000 more pieces of evidence. So we have to find an offsite. There's just nowhere here in Clayton that is affordable and has the amount of parking that you need for officers to come and pick up evidence for court and things like that. So we are looking at locations for that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other open items for discussion? Okay, I'll move on to approval of minutes from our meetings on May 26th, June 7th, and June 11th. I have a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Those minutes shall be approved. Amy, do we have any letters or communications?
I have no communications for you at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any old business? Hearing none, I'll move on to new business. The first item is approval of contracts. We have 5, so I will read them all at once. The first is a police service agreement with Melville School District for 7 school resource officers and 5 designated police vehicles for the regular school year. Police services agreement with Hancock Place School District for 1 school resource officer and 1 designated police vehicle for the regular school year. A police service agreement with Parkway School District for 3 school resource officers and 1 designated police vehicle. A professional service agreement with Bi-State Development Agency, which is a second amendment for a police services agreement with Bi-State Development Agency. And a professional services agreement with Optum Forensic. It is a new contract to provide St. Louis County and Municipal Police Academy with an instructor to teach a program titled DSLR Crime Scene Photography. May I have a motion to approve these contracts?
Motion.
Second.
Any comments or discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
These contracts are approved. Next, we have a general order, GO 21-120. It's a general order concerning the diversity and inclusion.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is a new general order based on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee that we have not ever had before. So we formed a general order on how we select the members, how they are elected. They have an executive board, what they're going to call them, that are appointed, and other members are elected. So we laid out in this general order, obviously with feedback from the Diversity and Inclusion Unit, on what their purpose of the committee is, the guidelines about the members and the volunteers. It's quite exact on all the different memberships and who can be on the committee and who has voting rights and who doesn't have voting rights, but they're going to get a lot of suggestions from a lot of different units within the department. They did a really, really good job of trying to find representation from all levels of the department to be included on this committee. And kind of a general overview, this committee basically is going to make recommendations through our office for policies changes. They're going to be included in our stakeholders group to look at the policies before they come out, make sure we can get input from them as well, as all of our other stakeholders. Also in the general order, it defines their terms of how often they'll meet, and hopefully their goals, their biggest goal is to help move the department forward. And this general order is going to kind of go into detail about how they're going to do that.
So is the diversity and inclusion, I see the diversity and inclusion unit is involved.
Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Nichols, who is the acting commander of the diversity and inclusion, he's going to be the chairman of this committee. He's going to oversee the meetings, but it has such a good representation from everywhere in the department. They can discuss anything they want. They can bring up issues and concerns through Sergeant Nichols, and then Sergeant Nichols will have a formal minutes, if you will, from the meetings. And if there's any issues specifically related to policies, he'll come to our office for policies. If there's other issues that maybe the chief needs to be aware of, he'll go through that proper channel to bring those issues to the chief.
So the committee meetings are just a general open forum.
Yes, ma'am.
To discuss issues that the committee members bring up.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
And is the committee also tasked with reviewing every policy that comes through?
Certain members of the committee will be. Yeah, it won't be the whole entire committee, because as you can see, there's probably going to be 20 to 30 people on the committee.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be a small, more refined group, probably the actual elected officers of the committee will review the policies, and then if they have concerns, they could bring it to the open committee for discussion.
And I apologize,
It's
I did not have a chance to review this general order prior to the meeting, so I'm trying
It's
to.
brilliantly written.
I'll show my ignorance or naivete in having a full-fledged committee like this. I'm going to use my terms, right? Big structure like this, the normal way you go about.
This is unique. This is unique just because of the size. Most other committees that we have on the department are limited to like one representative from precincts. I think the only thing to compare it to is the Chiefs Committee that she meets with once a month, where we have one representative from almost every unit, or at least every division in the department, and it's probably 20 to 25 people. So this would be somewhat similar in size to that, but the way they have this organized, they're going to divide it up into kind of smaller subcommittees that they can bring issues to the committee as a whole.
And so I'll build off Michelle's comments. And so what's the purpose of the committee? What are they supposed to do?
Well, they're supposed to provide feedback and policies. They're supposed to recommend equity issues, any kind of equity issues within the department, no matter what it is, they want to bring forward to the committee. Sergeant Nichols, Sergeant Nichols, yeah, in the diversity and inclusion unit, to try to bring some issues to him so that he can take it through the chain to the chief.
Thank you. And the people on the committee, so the committee members, you mentioned, so each of the representative regions or divisions of patrol, is that how we normally would structure it out, so that each unit is represented?
Yes, we try to have as much representative as we can. I think this committee actually really took off with a lot of interest, and a lot of the committee members are all voluntarily. They're already going to have within that committee, they're going to have elected officials, a chairman and a vice chairman and a secretary to keep minutes. But so many of them were voluntarily. We had such a huge response of people who want to be involved in this process that I think it's going to be a pretty big success.
Last question.
Sure.
Other than a committee, did we look at other ways in which to accomplish this? Again, I'm showing my ignorance, so this may be the only way we use to accomplish this, but there are other ways to do what you described without putting together a committee.
I think the short answer of that is that a lot of people within the department wanted to be included in at least voicing their concerns. And sometimes, as we all know, within society, some people don't get heard. And I think this is a way to show that we are interested in what their thoughts and opinions are. Sometimes they may not always work out, but at least we're listening to them and we have an interest in what they have to say to move the department forward.
So this is designed then to feed into the unit
Yes.
as far as the unit developing strategies.
Yes. And that's actually an excellent way to put it, because as you know, Sergeant Nichols is a one-man show right now. And this is going to help him bring new ideas into his unit so that he can have the ideas and the proposals to take to the department, move them forward. And it's going to be a really good collaboration where he can get a lot of assistance without having a 20-person unit. He's going to have a one-person unit with lots of ideas.
So that's sort of a concern, two concerns, I guess. The first one is that, I mean, this is structured really very, very well. My only concern is that it's so big that I'm worried about not only every voice being heard, but how to organize those meetings so that they're not, what can I say, a free-for-all.
Sure.
Because everybody wants, you said this earlier, everyone wants to have his or her voice heard, and that is certainly important to do. And I think that the committee this committee has value, but they're going to come up with so many things that they want to see happen right away. We're talking about a one-person unit. And so possibly one of the roles of this committee is to somehow or another develop strategies to increase the unit, to have input in terms of increasing the budget for the unit, because this is such an important issue. The whole idea of diversity and inclusion. I mean, this is probably really, really top priority. That I would not like to see it be unsuccessful because it's so, because number one, it's so large. Number two, their requests will be so plentiful that Officer Nichols will not be able to accommodate them all, which leads to frustration, and then you get this idea of what the heck is D&I anyhow. So I'm not criticizing, I'm supportive of what you're doing. I think that this has, as I said, I think it has great value. There's just a lot here, and I would hope that those people who volunteer will be able to organize themselves even in these smaller units so that all voices can be heard.
And I think you're right. I think there's a potential there for lots and lots of ideas and lots of concerns, and they will have to prioritize within their own structure what they think needs to be pushed forward and what they don't think needs to be pushed forward. Some of the interesting things that you pointed out about increasing the capacity of the unit, that's always been our department's goal, is to continue to make that unit bigger and more functional. You know, those are budget issues that the chief has to work out and get approved. I think hopefully the people on the committee will realize some of those things are outside the scope of what the committee is for, and that the committee should focus on the ideas and some potential changes the way we do business every day and within our own employees. And hopefully, I think that's what their focus probably will be, at least starting off.
So I guess, yes, right, that the tail doesn't wag the dog. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yes.
And overwhelm this one-man unit. So yeah, this is doable if in fact all of these folks understand their limited purview.
What you hear us expressing is a concern that we set up a bureaucracy that overwhelms the system and then can't get anything done. I think think that's generally what you're hearing, right? It's really vague, it's thoughtful. I think where I might ask is that once we put it in place and we voted in, that we got a 6-month review of whether it's working or not. So we can address it, or we can do lots of things after 6 months, but it just seems like a definite stopping point to review what's working and what's not working.
Okay. That's fair.
I have to say, I love this idea. But I'm reading the procedures, and it seems like everybody within the department who wants to participate may participate on a team. And there are 6 teams, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then each team elects a capital committee leader to represent the team's interests at this capital, when I say capital, I mean capital C committee, who meets, and that big committee meets once a month.
Right.
Okay. I think that's a really nice democratic representation of the department. What I don't see is how often the teams are meeting, or any procedure for the teams to communicate to the individual that they elect to represent their interests. And I'm worried that if we're going to balance the team's autonomy to figure out the best way for them to communicate versus not providing enough guidance, and therefore having membership in the lowercase c, the everybody group, be meaningful. Does that make sense?
Yes. I will, with your approval, I'll talk to Sergeant Nichols and find out what he had in mind for the structure of the lower, let's call them working groups, and how that will happen and how often we'll meet. I know he has a plan, but I've been, as you know, sometimes on the general orders, we don't get into the specifics of the weeds. We try to keep it somewhat general, and then they'll work out the smaller details later on, but I'll verify that with him.
Steve, just.
Oh, here he is right here. I tried to pump you up, but they didn't need it.
I wouldn't want to go into that.
Right.
So we're talking about the D&I committee. The D&I committee was set up originally as being change agents within the department. Her view is primarily to support the D&I unit itself, but also to engage their workplaces at the lowest levels to be eyes and ears, so to speak, around the department. We realized we didn't want to exclude anyone, so that's why originally we set it up where it would allow so many different people. We understood that a balance to ensure that it would still move forward on issues. It has been around since January of 2020. So we've had roughly about a year and a half of practicing, kind of tweaking. Some things we have been successful on as far as being stakeholders, dealing with promotional policies, practices, so forth and so on. Currently, we are working on professional staff, how they feel devalued, issues that they are bringing to the committee itself. We are using that platform as recommendations. We're addressing those issues, trying to separate them from what is a CBA issue, what is an issue that we can bring to our leaders to incorporate solutions. So it has been fruitful thus far. Primarily the team leaders that are elected, they communicate through email, through voice or phone, so forth and so on. We're kind of limited as far as how often we meet. We meet monthly though, but we're limited as far as how often we meet due to compensation. That monthly meeting is compensated for overtime, department overtime. But we have sub issues that we want to address currently, like what do department events look like next year, 2022. So in order to do that, we have to do that on our own time. So it is an extension somewhat of the D&I unit itself, but primarily the original focus was to extend and be change agents within their workspace. It was also part of a grander plan of having a D&I task force that would be above, primarily of executives as well as outside entities that would help facilitate some of the strategic plans and have somewhat of a structure where D&I could take the load off of our executive team to come up with viable solutions. That part has not been accomplished at this moment. So structurally, how you would see D&I in the focus of the department would be that we would have a pulse and understanding of the culture. The committee would be an extension of working out some of those issues, and from that task force, or what we would call a council, would be executives as well as outside entities that would be able to help strategically point the D&I unit as well as collectively in our department, our issues when it comes to that, to be able to equip our executive leaders on issues of inclusiveness. So it is large. It has been fruitful thus far. Every month we meet. There is an executive level as far as those elected members, as well as the chair, vice chair, secretary, and sergeant at arms that meet. And we that's also essentially has been our steering committee that would address big picture issues, seeing what we're going to tackle throughout the year and try to stay on course. That part is fairly working. It's just a point of ensuring that we have more help in the D&I unit to oversee a lot of those issues. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, where its original form came from. We look at them as being change agents, different from any other committee we had, because personally speaking, I want our committees to be more effective. And we just don't want individuals that will come and complain. We want individuals that's going to participate in the transformation. And that's what I mean by being change agents, and that's what we're trying to push on the committee itself.
So I really appreciate your explanation, because I really did not know that it was already in operation, but this was just, a new thing. And so you've already explained that it's working. Like any committee needs tweaking that, but you clarified all the other questions that I asked previously. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I love your speaking of change and transformation. Right? We're always changing, we're always transforming, having a plan to do it as opposed to letting it happen by circumstances. It's just great. You're comfortable that this is advancing. We'll adapt it when we need to. You're comfortable this is a good start.
I'm comfortable it's a good start. I do believe that third level is needed as far as an understanding of the higher level needs, things that are outside of my purview, that would be able to push a lot of issues that we see within the department and would take some of that load off of our executive team to be able to work with solutions that they could take and move forward with. So I do believe a council or some type of task force that would have a variety of entities involved is instrumental in that process, because then it gives me an opportunity to have someone to constantly speak to in regards to inclusive issues, in regards to all of those things, and not just bombard our executive team with issues that they don't have time for at the moment.
Building on the stuff we already do well and bringing things that we can do better. Yes.
I think it's great. I just want to reiterate my concern about the teams and how the teams are going to operate. I just don't want to be in a situation 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, where precinct A has a great team that's hugely involved in operational, and precinct C has one that isn't running, in a way that encourages participation. And so all of a sudden we have inequity in this committee and in the voices that are heard. So I would just suggest that we be very aware of that. And I don't know if we want to put it into this policy or be aware of it so that if it appears that it might be happening, we can jump in really early and
It's a great question. We have full participation when we have our Chiefs Committee. The challenges that we had early on in the D&I unit is that we would have individuals that would participate and just be naysayers. Or you have individuals that are forced to be in a D&I unit, especially within its size, that it slows down progress. So we did balance those things of mandatory, make it a mandatory participation across the board, and we decided not to have it mandatory. My perspective, is that in order to change an organization, we need input and participation with all parties. But realistically, that's not going to happen. And what I would rather like is individuals who are passionate about this department and would have the energy and the focus to try to work through some of the challenges that we have. And if that looks like full participation in some areas and not necessarily quite in other areas, we are trying our best to capture those other areas through other metrics and needs. And that's part of the reason why we created regions instead of, for instance, the precincts, regional teams instead of specific precincts, that the individuals be able to go in those regions and have those conversations. Those conversations are being had, we're capturing it. It's making sure that the system that's being built to have the lanes that information will be able to flow through is actually there. And we have some holes that we're trying to fill. So it is, I understand and respect the concern. It's a concern that I have as well. But so far, the best path has been to participate and engage those individuals that want to be there, especially on a matter like this. Because we also have the Chiefs Committee, which would be able to address issues, not necessarily in the same manner, but another path to address issues, as well as ESOP and FOP, which are members, which we made that intentional, and they are on the same team, and that's intentional. That they would have to face and try to work out issues collectively to affect change and not use this platform for whatever issues that they have. So it is challenging, but if we can create that council, if we can create that task force above us that would help in that, as well as continue to get the message out. One of the big things that we have or issues that we have within community engagement is the communication piece. And as you mentioned, you engage with Sergeant Grandin as far as asking for more personnel. The community engagement actually needs an additional body as well, dealing specifically with the communication. And that's part of our challenge, not only in the D&I unit, but with the committee itself, is to be able to communicate effectively internally as well as externally to our stakeholders, so we can keep everyone abreast of what we're doing, and they can have an understanding of how they can participate and how the department can move forward with their skills and expertise. So
We like your direction. We rely heavily on your leadership. Thank you for that.
thank you.
And so you were part of this, preparing this document?
Yes. A lot of that came from just really trying to figure out our direction. Yes, I was heavily involved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Motion.
The question is, we need a motion to accept the job.
Yes. So, motion,
I'll second.
any discussion? Questions, comments?
I haven't already.
Okay, then I will ask for a vote. Please say aye if you vote to approve the general order.
Aye.
General order shall be approved. Next on our agenda is any public forum comments. Are there any comments?
We received no public comments.
Okay. Next on our agenda, the Board of Police Commissioners may vote to go into closed meeting for review of claims and lawsuits involving the police department, section 610.0211 RSMO, and section 114.0201 SLCRO, discussion of employee and personnel matters, section 610.0213 and 13 RSMO, and sections 114.0203 and 13 SLCRO, and an update on union negotiations, section 610.0219 RSMO, and sections 114.0209 SLCRO. I have a motion to go into closed meeting.
I move that commissioners go into closed session.
Second.
May we have a roll call vote, please, Amy?
Commissioner Ashworth,
Yes.
Commissioner Banks,
Yes.
Commissioner Hassler,
Yes.
and Commissioner Schwerin.
Yes, we will now go into closed meeting. Closed session. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Amy, may we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Ashworth, Commissioner Banks,
Yes.
Commissioner Hassler,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwerin.
Yes. This meeting shall be closed. We look forward to seeing everybody on
July 15th.
July 15th. Thank you.